So back to the first paragraph. Your sight was made by the ego, that you would see what the ego wished to see. Rejoice, for this is freedom of God in action. And I think this is a wonderful first place to pause, because I think often when we are seen with the ego, we are not in a state of rejoicing. We're actually in a state of resistance. We are hating the way we see, judging the way we see. I'm sure we're wishing that we saw differently, but often that wish that we would see differently is coming from a place of judgment against the way we see now. There's a frustration in it, there's a desperation in it. And these types of emotions are not helpful because this is still ego. What we want to do is let go of the ego. So even judging the ego is ego. And if we're listening to the judgment of ego, we are still listening to ego, which means we're not letting it go. You understand you're either listening or letting go. You're either listening or letting go. You're not doing both in any one moment. So if you are judging your ego way of seeing, you are listening, and in that moment you are not letting go. So Holy Spirit is offering us another way to look at even the ego and the ego way of seeing, and that is rejoice, for this is the freedom of God in action. In other words, our Father has given us absolute and perfect freedom without any limits. And this in itself is a wonderful and marvelous gift. What we have chosen to do with that is to ask the question, the famous tiny mad idea, what would it be like if everything was different than it is? And what we have chosen to do with that is then to create this experience of a world of differences and suffering, good days and bad, and all of that is out of a state of freedom. So instead of being focused on the specifics of what we see, which we may be very tempted to judge, we're asked to focus on the idea that allowed what we see. And that which allowed what we see is freedom. And if we can rejoice for the freedom, then we are not judging the ego. And if we are not judging the ego, we are letting go, because we're not listening to the ego. We are letting go. So in rejoicing for freedom, we are letting go of the ego. But some people may ask, but if I am rejoicing for the freedom that creates war, rejoicing for the freedom that creates starvation, rejoicing for the freedom that creates, people who abuse children and animals, doesn't that continue? Well, Holy Spirit answers, rejoice again. For the freedom of God offers another choice. Right? The freedom did not stop with our choice to create the ego. We also have the freedom to now allow the undoing of that. So rejoice in our perfect freedom. The only question that leaves in my mind is, what do I want to do with the perfect freedom? Where do I want to let my mind be?